Hello everybody and welcome back to a special video, my 100 subscribers special, my top 100 coasters. This is not a good idea. Before we start, a few things I'd like to say. First, thank you all for 100 subscribers. It's a milestone I've been working for 2.5 years since I started uploading coaster videos to this channel. And also, disclaimer with this video, I've only been on between 175 and 190 coasters, depending on what you count. And that means that the beginning of the list might not be the most interesting. So I'm leaving a pinned comment with the top 50, top 25, and top 10 coasters if you just want to skip to those parts, because this is going to be a long one. A few more notes before the video starts. One, all pictures in this video will be mine, and if I don't have a picture of the ride, it'll just be my logo. And second, and finally, there are a lot of parks I haven't been to, notably any parks outside of the US that isn't Olin Towers, and most Six Flags park outside of the Northeast, and among other exceptions. Okay, starting off the list very strongly with number 100, Slinky Dog Dash at Walt Disney's Hollywood Studios. Okay, hear me out. This is only on here because the theming is pretty good. Like, the launch is just kind of slow. I mean, I remember being a bit surprised. There were a few more forces than I was expecting. But this is fully a family coaster, and I understand that. It's a decent family coaster, and the theming is good, okay? Number 99 is Twister at Knoebels, a wooden coaster I barely remember anything about. After looking at a POV, it looks decent, and I remember it not being bad, so it goes here, I guess. Number 98 is another wooden coaster I don't remember too much about, Thunderbolt at Kennywood, except I remember this one slightly more, and I remember it being cool. There's a long pre-lift section, and just you go through the trees, and you get to see Phantom's Revenge, which is pretty nice, which will be much later on the list. Number 97 is a coaster I've criticized quite harshly in the past, Valraven at Cedar Point. And it's a not very good dive coaster. The vest restraints aren't great, you don't get any air off the dive itself or the mid-course. The elements just sort of or whatever. The 0G roll is the only reason it's even on this list to begin with. And that's not because I don't like dive coasters. I've been on 3. This is the worst. The next one is all the way up at 36. Number 96 and 95 are Backlot Stunt Coaster at Kings Island and Kings Dominion. I don't remember the difference between these two rides, so I'm just combining them into one spot. This is just a really fun family coaster, some decent like backlot movie theming. The Helix gives some pretty good G's. The launch and the dark part are just pretty fun, and it's overall an enjoyable ride. Next at 94 is Runaway Tram at Maurice Piers, and this was just a fun family coaster. And also it's kind of funny because the tram car at Wildwood is kind of annoying, but it goes around twice, so it's obviously a family coaster. I just remember it being like much better than I expected. Number 93 is another Maurice Piers coaster that I actually was a bit let down by, but it's still overall pretty fun. Great White. I said Runaway Tram was better in my Maurice Piers video. I've changed my mind. Great White was decent enough. It wasn't too rough. There were a few decent airtime moments. There was nothing about it that was too bad. It was just a kind of underwhelming Woody. Number 92 is Dominator at Kings Dominion, another coaster I talk generally negative about. It's just an okay floorless coaster. The loop is big, which is cool, and it's not bad. There's a bit of headbanging, but it's alright. Number 91 is Raging Cajun at Six Flags America. It's a spinning wild mouse. It's Cajun time. Number 90, Super Duper Looper at Hershey Park. Pretty much the loop in this ride is really, tight and gives some really good G-forces, and the rest of the ride meanders around and does nothing. But the loop carries it all the way up to number 90. Next is a large group of similar in quality spinning coasters, starting with number 89, Pandemonium at Six Flags, New England. This is a coaster I rode a long time ago and don't really remember much about. It's just an average spinning coaster. Number 88 is Shredder at Nickelodeon Universe in the American Dream Mall. This is a very average spinning coaster. I don't remember much about it. It's a spinning coaster, okay? Next is Laugh Track at Hershey Park, a ride I have been on quite a few times, and I do like the theming, and if I'm not gonna incorporate this, but the Halloween and Christmas overhauls for this ride are really cool. But as it stands, the ride is just a decent spinning coaster, but with decent theming. The final spinning coaster in this chunk is Spinball Wizard, which is my favorite layout out of all of these, and I felt gave the most spinning. And also, I like the theme of pinball. I think that really works well with the spinning coaster. Number 85 is the Coma Flying Dutchman Nighthawk at Carowinds, which is a bit of an overhated ride, but it is a bit shaky and you are on your back a bit more than I'd like. And it also shows how big of a quality gap Carowinds has. Because this is my 5th favorite coaster at Carowinds, my 4th favorite is all the way up at 23. We have an odd one at number 84 with Wild West Express at Adventure Park USA, a coaster and park I have literally never talked about in any videos. This is just a smaller park with only 2 notable coasters, this being one of them, and it's just an odd, compact, weird thing. It's a family-oriented coaster, but it has some just weird elements. I recommend looking up a POV of this thing. It's odd. Number 83 is our next Disney coaster, Expedition Everest at Animal Kingdom. This is just an okay ride. I like the theming. The giant mountain costs $100 million for a reason. It's really cool. I like the part where you just go and see that the track ended, but just nothing about the ride is that exceptional. Like, I mean, you have Disco Yeti, and the drop itself is just, it's one large turn. It feels like a GCI drop. But again, it's a Disney park. It's more theming oriented and more oriented around families. So for that, it's pretty good. Next, in number 82 is Black Diamond at Knoebels, which is just a fun dark ride that happens to have a drop. That's it. Next, at number 81 is Blazing Fury at Dollywood, which is another fun dark ride that has multiple drops. I mean, I like dark rides, but on a coaster list, this is high as it's pretty much going to get. Next, at number 80 is Dark Knight at Great Adventure. This is just a well-themed Wild Mouse. Theming is definitely carrying a lot of rides in this section. Number 79 is another coaster I have a bit of a hot take on, Thunderhead at Dollywood, which overall isn't that great. It's still a GCI, which is why it's all the way up here, but it's just rough. Maybe I caught it on a bad day, but it just wasn't running well at all. But it has a good layout, and that saves it. Number 78 is Lightning Racer at Hershey Park, and I pretty much have the same opinions, except the dueling element is cool. And also, I think the most recent time I've rode it, it definitely was running better, so that helps. Number 77 is one of only 3 Aero custom loopers on this list, despite the fact that I've been on quite a lot. It's Viper at Six Flags Darien Lake, which is just overall a solid Aero custom looper. Unlike most of them, you don't get too much headbanging, and just overall, decent G-forces. I like the tunnel bit, and it was just kind of fun. Next is Manta at SeaWorld San Diego. Pretty much a better version of Slinky Dog Dash with worse theming. Okay, maybe it's not that similar, but same manufacturer, and it's just a launched family coaster. Next, at number 75, is Vertigo at Kings Island, a coaster that I think has permanently screwed up my neck. But still, it's pretty fun. It jerks you around a bit, but the track itself is pretty smooth, and it definitely gives a lot better G-forces than most Vekoma boomerangs. Number 74 is another Kings Island ride, Bat. Unlike Iron Dragon, which sadly did not make the top 100, despite being my 100th coaster credit, this is a really solid Aero suspended coaster that is a lot faster and more intense than I was expecting. I definitely can see how Big Bad Wolf at Busch Gardens Williamsburg would have been a really great ride. Next, at number 73, is the Exterminator at Kennywood. It's another spinning Wild Mouse, except it has some pretty solid theming. Number 72 is Flying Turns at Knoebels, one of only 2 bobsled rides I've been on, and one of the very few wooden bobsled rides left. I definitely liked it more than the one at King's Dominion, but I did ride it before it was repainted. But this is just, it's just another just solid ride. This is the section of rides where I really don't have much to say. They're all just decent. Number 71 is Raptor at Cedar Point. My least favorite B&M invert, but a low-end B&M invert is good enough to get here, and it's okay. I remember it just jerks you around a lot. Definitely some headbanging, and that last bit before the brake run is honestly painful. But it's a B&M invert. It's good. Next, kicking off the top 70 is Leap the Dips at Lakemont Park, the oldest coaster still in operation. This ride is honestly probably the scariest ride on this entire list. Going on this with absolutely no restraint is kind of scary and definitely feels like you're about to fall out, which is why it's good. Number 69 is Wildcat at Adventure Park USA. This is an old Schwarzkopf Wildcat model that's been moved around quite a lot and has been to many parks such as Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. And it was just an overall decent and fun ride. It's basically a better version of Rolly's Coaster at Maurice Piers. Number 68 is Medusa at Six Flags Great Adventure. I know I said in my Great Adventure video, the second one, that this was my favorite floorless, and no, Hydra, I realized, is much better, and that'll come later on this list. But still, this was a solid floorless that didn't give too much headbanging, and the elements were pretty solid, the theming wasn't bad, and the fire effects worked. For Six Flags, that's pretty shocking. Number 67 is Joker's Jinx at Six Flags America, a, I believe, premier launch spaghetti bowl coaster. This, as I said in my Six Flags America vlog, is definitely carried by its launch, and the rest of the layout is just kind of whatever. The pacing in the first half is really slow, and the second half is a bit uncomfortable. It's pretty much a worse version of Flight of Fear, which is coming up later. Number 66 is a pretty old wooden coaster, Jackrabbit at Kennywood. To be honest, this ride did absolutely nothing for me, except for the amazing double down, which is extremely good and carries the ride into this spot. Like, the rest of the ride, I remember kind of being rough and sort of whatever, but that double down, it's worth riding just for that alone. Number 65 is another pretty hot take, Diamondback at Kings Island. This was my second ever B&M Hyper, and it just does nothing. There's very little, if any, floater airtime on any of the hills, and it just, there weren't really any forces at all. You just sort of went around. But it's still a pretty solid B&M, and, like, I'm only going to put a B&M Hyper so low on the list. Sure, it wasn't great, but it's still a Hyper. It's tall, it's still fun. It's just, it did nothing for me. Next up is the Premier Skyrocket 2 Electric Eel at Six Flags San Diego. This was my first ever Skyrocket 2 model, and I've only done two, this and Tempesto was really rough and not good. This one, despite having comfort collars, I actually enjoyed quite a lot. It's a very odd ride model, and the launch was decent, and some of the inversions are fun and give some solid hang time. Number 63 is Fire Chaser Express at Dollywood. This is a family launch coaster, but despite it being family in nature, the first, and to a lesser extent, the second backwards launch, were both pretty solid. The rest of the ride was just sort of okay, but the theming and combined with the two launches make this a pretty fun ride. Number 62 is a placement that'll shock many of you, as many of you were probably expecting this to be number 1. But sadly, the coaster at Goats on the Roof only made it to number 62. It's an average alpine coaster, but it's Goats on the Roof, so it gets bonus points. Also, alpine coasters are just pretty fun in general. Number 61 is my only 40 free spin Joker at Six Flags Great Adventure. This is just an overall solid ride, and I know there's a lot of these, and that people are probably sick of them by now, but I don't really mind these being at almost every Six Flags on Earth, but the fact that I've only ridden one is kind of surprising, to be honest, but I think it's really fun, and the flips give you some pretty solid G-forces, and yeah, they're just fun, smaller additions for parks. Number 60 is my second favorite Aero Custom Looper, Loch Ness Monster at Busch Gardens, Williamsburg. This is a very solid and decently long Aero Looper with the iconic interlocking loops, and unlike most Aero Loopers, I don't remember getting any headbanging at all, even in the back row, and I just remember it being really fun. Also, I'm kind of a sucker for tunnels. I don't know, I just like tunnels on rides. Number 59 is 13 at Olin Towers. Well, the first half through the woods is pretty much just a family coaster. Once you get to the indoor area with the super cool drop track and backwards launch and dark part back to the station, that is really good. But the first half, I'll take it or leave it, so that drags it down a bit. But that second half is really fun. Next at number 58 is 13 But Better for Bolton at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. This has a pretty slow first part, and then you get to the indoor portion, which is okay, and then the drop track and the launch up to the big bridge and the drop over the water, that stuff is really great. So, a mediocre first half and a solid second half, theme to the woods. Yeah, this is just 13 again, but slightly better. Number 57 is another Olin Towers coaster, Rita. Rita honestly gets more hate than it deserves. Like, it really isn't that bad. It has a bit of a rattle to it, and it's a bit short, and it gets some pretty long lines. But the launch is solid. Not my favorite on an Intamin, but it's still pretty solid. The turns give some okay positive G-forces, but overall it's just a fun ride. The launch definitely is the highlight. Number 56 and 55 are Flight of Fear at King's Dominion and King's Island respectively. It's pretty much the same thing I said with Joker's Jinx, except with better theming, and almost all of the layout is in pitch black. I picked King's Island over King's Dominion as the better one because I think the queue theming was better, but maybe I just remembered wrong. Number 54, sadly beating out fan favorite Goats on the Roof, is Smoky Mountain Alpine Coaster. Just objectively, this is a better mountain coaster. The lift hill was less boring, and the light package at night was super cool. Although I did see Goats on the Roof also has a decent light package, but just riding this at night really boosted it up. I'm really sorry, Goat Coaster. I'm really sorry. Number 53 is my favorite Aero Custom Looper, Tennessee Tornado at Dollywood. This is just a very solid ride. There's pretty much no headbanging. The elements all are pretty intense. It's relatively short, and they were running one train ops on one of the probably busiest days of the summer. I had to wait an hour and a half, and Lightning Rod was closed. I wanted that to be 150, but instead this was 150, and seriously... Okay then, number 52 is The Beast at Kings Island, the longest coaster in the United States, and the longest wooden coaster. Besides the helix, there wasn't any part of the ride that really stood out too much, but just how long this ride is, and like, it just feels like an adventure in the woods. And also, I didn't ride it at night ever, but I've heard legendary things about Beast Night Ride, so I'll give it some points for that. Next at number 51 is Escape from Gringotts. I haven't gone to Universal in many, many years, so I was pretty young when I rode this, and like, this was back when Dueling Dragons was around, so I don't really remember this ride too well, but I remember the theming being pretty good, especially the queue, and I liked how like the track tilted. I thought that was cool, and then I remember the indoor dark part was pretty decent. Next, kicking off the top 50 is a Disney coaster, Rock and Roller Coaster. This is honestly pretty decent for being a Vekoma coaster, but overall, I thought the launch was pretty fun. Again, I rode this years ago. I was really young when I first rode this, but I mean, the theming is decent, the launch is strong, and then the ride experience itself, some of the inversions are okay, and nothing's too rough or uncomfortable. Number 49 is my favorite Disney/Universal coaster, and it's Revenge of the Mummy at Universal Studios, I think. So overall, again, it's been a long time since I've been on it, but I really liked the beginning dark ride portion, and then the launch and all the dark parts. The fake out ending isn't very convincing, but then there's like the cool fire effect, and there's some really cool effects on this ride. And well, I remember the ride experience being decent, but I remember the highlight was just the effects and the animatronics and that kind of stuff. Number 48 is one of the weirdest coasters I've been on, being Gale Force at Playland's Castaway Cove. This is like a Skyrocket 2, except like designed by a toddler. Like, you have the same like backwards forwards bit, but I don't even know I don't know what counts as inversions on this ride. I don't know. This ride is just so confusing. Again, if you don't know this ride, look up a video of it. The elements just feel made up. I don't actually think they're even real elements. Next at number 47 is the first B&M flyer I've ever been on, Superman Ultimate Flight. I remember I said in the video that this ride is like shockingly sort of relaxing, like no elements are too intense, except for the pretzel loop, which comes out of nowhere and is like an almost gray out. Like, you're not quite graying out, but you're almost there. So it's kind of a weird mix, but I overall think it's okay. But my least favorite of the two flyers I've been on. One spot above that is another flyer, but this time it's a Coma flying Dutchman, being Batwing at Six Flags America. I know I said this was the best ride in the park, I changed my mind. This ride is a relatively short coaster, but it's basically a better version of Nighthawk. I mean, you're facing the ground a bit more, it's smoother, the elements are more intense, and it's overall decent, especially by Six Flags America standards. Number 45 is a coaster that I'm sure would be higher if Hershey Park wasn't my home park, and it's Great Bear. This is a very solid B&M invert. The first helix is pretty intense, the drop is solid, and then some of the inversions are also pretty good. I like the view over the water, but I don't know, it just something of this, it just doesn't click as much as some of the other B&M inverts I've been on. But again, if Hershey wasn't my home park, this probably would be higher. Next up is another coaster that should probably be higher, but it isn't because it's at Hershey, and that's Fahrenheit. This is like a very weird coaster. It's an Intamin something. It's closer to like a Gerstlauer Eurofighter though. It has the Intamin like over the shoulder soft restraints, which I mean I don't mind them too much. And I remember like the first element is pretty good. I forget there's a lot of weird elements on this ride, but stuff like the Cobra roll isn't very comfortable. And there originally, I mean, there still is, but I feel like the ejector hill towards the end gave a lot better airtime than it does now. Number 43 is the first wooden coaster in quite a while, Wicker Man at Olin Towers. This is a GCI, and it's a relatively new one. I described it as pretty much less intense Mystic Timbers, and it's more focused on laterals rather than airtime. It's also more family-oriented, but yeah, it's also a better version of Invader. Like, Invader at Busch Gardens I found rough and not that fun. This, on the other hand, it has better theming, and it's just a better overall ride experience. Next at 42 is my favorite B&M floorless, being Hydra at Dorney Park. Obviously, the ride peaks before it even gets to the lift hill with the first JoJo roll, but then, I mean, while the track is a bit shaky, it's a very weird ride. Like, the Cobra roll is shaped so awkwardly. But no, I think all the inversions on this are pretty solid, but nothing outside of the JoJo roll is a real standout. And B&M Florists aren't my favorite, but this one's pretty good. Number 41 is the only B&M wing coaster I've been on, Gatekeeper. The first drop is cool, and the near miss elements with the keys are pretty solid, and it looks really great from the entrance. And obviously the keys are the best part, but then the second half I wouldn't consider it the second half, but once you hit the mid-course, just nothing else really happens. It's just like a helix. And I think the ride overall is still pretty good. Number 40 is an underrated B&M invert, being Alpengeist at Busch Gardens Williamsburg. This is just a really big B&M invert that I think is way overhated. It's not that rough. I believe it's the tallest and fastest B&M invert. It's quite long. All the inversions are pretty solid. I like the end when you go through the terrain. Overall, I don't know why so many people don't like this ride. Number 39 is another Busch Gardens Williamsburg coaster, being Apollo's Chariot, the first B&M hyper I've ever ridden. And it's not one of the stronger ones. It's better than Diamondback, and it was on my original top 15 I made like 2 years ago, and I don't know, that was a weird decision. But I think it was the only really good hyper I've been on at the time. It gives you some airtime, and I respect it for being the first one, but Still, a weaker B&M hyper is still a good ride. Number 38 is the original Skyrocket at Kennywood. This is a launch coaster that I don't really feel is at all similar to the Skyrocket 2, but whatever. This, I believe I got a front row ride after waiting about an hour for this, and the launch is solid, the top hat is good. It's a kind of short ride, but I don't remember too much about it. I just remember it being a decently fun launch coaster. Next up is the first ever B&M flyer and my favorite flying coaster, Galactica at Olin Towers. This ride was originally named Fly and then rethemed Semi and given VR, but they've since removed the VR. And I think this is just a really solid flying coaster. It feels a lot more like you're flying, and it's more thrilling overall. than Superman Ultimate Flight, and it's just a really smooth ride unlike the Dutchman's, so I just think it overall leads to a great experience. Number 36 is another Olin Towers B&M, being Oblivion. This was, according to the ride, the first ever vertical drop coaster, but I think it's only like 88 degrees, and the first B&M dive, and it was a really solid start. It's more similar to another B&M dive I'll talk about in a few spots rather than Valraven, as it has the better old school restraints that give you a solid amount of airtime on the drop. Underground in the tunnel, it's actually like legitimately pretty cold, and then there's the left turn, and then the ride's over. If it was longer, it would be higher, but there is another longer dive coaster later. Number 35 is the best coaster I rode while I was Dollywood because Lightning Rod was closed, but Mystery Mine is overall a very solid ride. I mean, in the first half, it's a bit awkward and janky and gives you a bit of headbanging, but then the second half with the vertical lift, the steep drop, the Heartline roll, and the dive loop, those elements are really great. And overall, the theming's solid, and that vulture is very annoying. At 34, we have Tantrum at Six Flags Darien Lake. This is just a typical, pretty highly cloned Gerstlauer Eurofighter, but despite the fact that it's at other places, it's still overall solid ride. The drop's fun. The maybe inversions, I still don't know how many inversions are actually on this ride, but the maybe inversions are all pretty solid, and I don't really have any complaints with this ride besides the short length. Number 33 is Superman Ride of Steel at Six Flags America. I'm not going to say much about it now since it's pretty much a worse version of the one at Darien Lake. Number 32 is Dorney Park's B&M Invert Talon. This is one of my favorite inverts. It's like completely smooth, and after the first loop, it's a gray out for me every time. Then I like the low to the ground turn. The second half has some solid elements, and just really, there's nothing at all I can criticize with this invert. It's just really solid. Next at 31 is Ride of Steel at Darien Lake. Everything I say here applies to the one at Six Flags America, except that one's rougher. So pretty much this ride is a very odd hypercoaster, and in the grand scheme of hypercoasters, one of the weaker ones, but it's still pretty solid. The helices give some decent G-forces. The first airtime hill doesn't do much, but the second major airtime hill and the string of them towards the end of the ride give some pretty nice airtime. And overall, I mean, it's a hyper. There are no bad hypers. Actually, wait, no. Big Apple Coaster and Desperado, those kind of suck. Starting off the top 30, I have a bit of a controversial opinion. Magnum Xl200. I overall like this ride. I have about the same opinion as the first half as everybody else. Like, it's decent. The turnaround's kind of janky. But then the way back, I mean, sure, I've never been on it in the back and never been on it in, like, the magic seat or whatever it's called. But the string of airtimes in the back, they give a lot of raw, powerful airtime, but, like, it's not enjoyable. It's not enjoyable airtime. Still, I mean, the ride itself, it's decent. I mean, well, there's no bad hyper. Oh, wait. Number 29 is Candemonium at Hershey Park. This is just sort of middle of the road when it comes to being a hyper. The camelbacks are decent enough. The helix into like the twisted airtime hill I expected a bit more from, but it's still a decent element. Then the two sets of trims on the ride are pretty annoying, but then the helix around the fountain's pretty nice, and it's a bit shorter than I wish it was, but it's a B&M hyper. At number 28, we have the fourth hyper in a row on this list, being Steel Force at Dorney Park, which this, and it probably applies to all the other Morgan hypers. I've never been on another one outside of Phantom's Revenge, but these normal Morgan hypers are like legitimately just better versions of Magnum. The first half is stronger, the turnaround is stronger, and then the hills at the end aren't as uncomfortable. Number 27 is another coaster that kind of suffers from it being at Hershey, Storm Runner. This ride has a very solid launch. The top hat's fun. The Cobra Loop, I believe, is okay. And then the Heartline roll into the Flying Snake Dive, that part is really great. So overall, a very solid ride, but there is a similar Intimate Accelerator I like more. Number 26 is the first RMC on this list. However, it's Jersey Devil Coaster, the probably most hated in quotation marks, RMC. despite the kind of bad reputation this has, this is still a really great ride. It is way shakier than it should be, and I don't know what causes that, but it has some solid floater and ejector airtime. The stall's fun, and overall it has decent pacing, but compared to the other Raptors, of course, it's not looked at quite as fondly. Starting off the top 25 is Accelerator at Knott's Berry Farm. And I think this is honestly better than Storm Runner purely because the launch is amazing. I believe at one point it was the fastest accelerating launch in the country, and you can really feel that. The top hat is decent, and the final two turns at the end really add to it. Number 24 is another Intamin accelerator and the tallest coaster in the world, King to Ka. And yes, I do prefer Top Throw Dragster over Ka. I think Ka's launch is pretty good, but I just overall think this ride is pretty shaky, especially when Dragster's older, yet it's smoother. Also, the plastic shoulder harnesses are pretty annoying. But the launch is pretty good. I don't think it's quite as good as the launch on Dragster, but it's pretty good. And then the top hat, again, is solid. I mean, it's a 400-foot tall launch coaster. It's got to be at least decent. Number 23 is the first Carowinds coaster since all the way back at number 85. And it's my least favorite of the four main coasters there, but it's still decent. It's Copperhead Strike. This ride is like all other mocks, and like the launch isn't very good, but the inversions are all pretty solid and give us a lot of hang time. And I think the ejector hill is a bit underrated. Like, it gives a lot of airtime. Number 22 is Banshee at Kings Island. This is another B&M invert, and it's definitely one of my favorites. The first drop on this is great, especially because it doesn't have like the little dip before the drop, and that really caught me off guard. And I think all the inversions on this ride are solid, and my only issue with it is it's a bit shaky, so that's kind of odd. Same with Diamondback, and from what I've heard also Orion, so that's weird. But I overall think all the inversions on this are really intense, and it's one of my favorite inverts. Number 21 is the next Carowinds wide Intimidator. You'll be seeing the other Intimidator a lot later on this list, but this is still a very solid and top half of my B&M hypers. This ride is a lot bigger than most B&M hypers, and the airtime it gives is consistently solid. There are a few spots, I believe, with trim brakes, so it's a bit annoying, but it's a bunch of fun camelbacks. You can't really go wrong, unless it's Diamondback. Number 20 is Griffin at Busch Gardens. And I went to Busch Gardens Williamsburg before they built Pantheon, but when I went, this was easily my favorite coaster at the park. The drop gives a lot of airtime, and same with the drop off the mid-course. It's a slightly less because it's shorter. And then the rest of the elements, like the Immelman, just kind of round the coaster out. So it pretty much puts it this far up above Oblivion. Number 19 is a coaster I've complimented quite a lot, and that's Millennium Force at Cedar Point. A semi-controversial coaster where some people think it's great, some people think it's just Millennium Forces, and I'm definitely on the more positive end, as I said in my video. The first drop is crazy good next to the water. The first turnaround gives some decent G-forces. I normally gray out. And then when you go in the tunnel, then the layout starts slowing down a bit. It's more drawn out, but it's still an adventure through the park. And then the speed hill's great, and the final turnaround's pretty good too. I overall think this ride's pretty underrated at this point. It keeps switching between under and overrated. But I think at the current moment, it is underrated, and it's overall a really great ride. Number 18 is Afterburn at Carowinds, my second favorite B&M invert. This is probably one of the most intense coasters I've ever been on. There were multiple moments when I grayed out, and the only issue I have with this ride is I don't exactly remember any particular elements standing out too much, but it just was an overall really intense and solid experience. Number 17 and 16 are two rides I've gone back and forth on quite a lot, as they're two great Gerstlauers, but at number 17 I've decided to put the Smiler. The Smiler is, of course, the ride with the most inversions in the entire world, and all of them are great. Particularly, I like the slow Heartline roll at the beginning and the two corkscrews at the end. But overall, they're all really solid. My only gripe with this ride is it's a bit rough, so that's kind of annoying. And I feel like the midway chain lift doesn't completely kill the pacing, but it's kind of weird. And I can't talk about this ride without like talking about the crazy theme of it with the theme song, and like, you know what I'm gonna say. It's great. It's weird. I don't really get what the designers were thinking. I think they may have been insane, but it's super cool. The other Gerstlauer I decided to barely give the edge is Tmnt Showrazer. I mean, it's obviously quite similar to Smiler. I mean, they're both record-breaking, large Gerstlauers with a slow heartline roll at the beginning and a vertical chain lift midway through the layout. But what I think really carries Shellraiser above is the steepest drop in the world, which is absolutely crazy. Even if there is no back row, you still get pulled a ton. And the launch is a lot more powerful than I was expecting. My issue with this ride is it's also pretty shaky. But what's weird about this coaster is if you look at like off-ride footage of this thing, the whole track is just swaying back and forth. I understand coasters are not supposed to be completely rigid or else that would legitimately be dangerous. This almost seems like too loose. Number 15 is Top Throw Dragster. So basically just take what I said about Car earlier and just have better restraints, because it's just a lap bar, and a much smoother ride experience. And also, I think the bleachers really add to it. I just think the spectacle of it is really cool. 14 is my favorite B&M Hyper, Nitro at Six Flags Great Adventure. I think the first half of this is just like most other B&M Hypers. It's just a bunch of decent camelbacks. But then the Helix is a gray out for me every time, and the final set of bunny hills are really great. After a long break, number 13 is finally another wooden coaster, being Phoenix at Knoebels. This is just like an average PTC Buzz Bar Woody, except for the fact that it lacks seatbelts, and that makes the airtime on this ride absolutely crazy. The double downs towards the end, that's amazing, and pretty much any time you go either up or down, you are flying out of your seat. Though golden tickets, really? What? This is the best wooden coaster? Number 12 is the final coaster that I might have a bit of a bias against since that Hershey, and it's Skyrush. This is the coaster I've ridden most out of any coaster to ever exist. I've probably been on it between like 50 and 60 times, and it's still great. In the back row, left wing, which is like the best seat on the coaster, the first drop is absolutely crazy. I mean, the first drop's crazy in all the rows, but the back row, the first drop is so good. The 3 airtime hills are great, and the almost stangle dive, not quite thing is pretty cool. And I think at least near opening, the final airtime hill had like statistically the most negative G's out of any airtime hill on any coaster. Number 11 is my third favorite wooden coaster I've been on, and it's Ghost Rider at Knott's Berry Farm. Just keep in mind, I rode this in 2018, so pretty close to after the retrack. So if it's like running bad now or in the future, or if you rode it before the retrack, I understand if your opinion may be different, but I rode it right after the retrack, and this thing was great. It's everything you want in a wooden coaster. Solid airtime, solid laterals, a long layout, buttery smooth thanks to the GCI track, and it's just such a well-balanced and perfect wooden coaster. Like, perfect in the sense that I don't have any issues with it. Not perfect in the sense that it's the best coaster ever made. But still, it's a really great ride. No complaints. Kicking off our top 10, we have Phantom's Revenge at Kennywood. Oh, also, hi anyone who just went to the top 10 timestamp. This ride is great through and through. The first half is pretty solid. There's pretty much 2 main drops, with the second one actually being bigger. It's sort of like Millennium Force in a way. It's just bigger, more drawn out elements that focuses a lot on speed. Then you get to the legendary second half, which just, I believe like 4 or so of the best ejector hills ever. I also feel very lucky. I was assigned a back row just randomly. I only got 1 ride on it, and it just happened to be at the back. But those last string of airtime hills are amazing and push this ride from maybe around like 20s to like upper teens to all the way up to the top 10. At number 9, we have another wooden coaster, being Mystic Timbers at Kings Island. This is another buttery smooth, amazing GCI coaster. The first drop is nothing special, but then after that, it's just a bunch of different kinds of airtime hills in a normal out and back layout. And also, I mean, the shed, it kind of sucked at the time, but come on, looking back, the shed was pretty funny. And also, it has a decent theme overall. Bit incoherent, but the theme's cool. And it has such elements as, I'm speaking off the top of my head, so I'm not 100% sure if these are real, but I think the trick track double up and the double camelback trick track. Okay, I would say from like number 8 to number 2, I could honestly go back and forth on these, and they easily could change. So if you don't like my ranking, they're all pretty close, and they're all amazing. Number 8 is the ride in this group I probably have the least authority to talk on, and being Wicked Cyclone at Six Flags New England. I went to Six Flags New England all the way back when I was 9, so I didn't ride stuff like Superman, obviously. But I did go on Wicked Cyclone, and it absolutely blew me away. But I don't exactly know the best way to compare it to other rides I've been on, since, again, I was 9 years old, and I'd never been on anything like it ever. And I remember liking the inversions the most, which I doubt if I rerode, that's what I'd like the most. But still, it's an RMC hybrid. They're all great, and this one looks good too. It's been so long since I've went on it that I wouldn't put it any higher than this. Number 8 is a coaster that might be a little controversial being this low, and that's Fury 325 at Carowinds. Don't get me wrong, it's a great ride, but hear me out. Okay, the first drop is probably my favorite first drop on pretty much any coaster. Actually, no, second favorite. With the combination of a 320 some foot drop and B&M clamshell restraints is crazy. And I think the treble clef about midway through the ride is also really great. But then the issue is, I remember the rest of the ride being good, but I don't remember really any other significant standout elements outside of the first drop and treble clef. Again, don't get me wrong, this ride is amazing, and, I mean, it's a giga, but there are a few things I like more. Number 6 is Maverick at Cedar Point, an Intamin Blitz coaster. I overall think this ride is even better than people say it is. The first ride I got on it was great, but it was a while ago. The second one was in 40-degree weather, but the most recent time I went on it, it was amazing. The snappy turns are pretty much straight out of I-305. The twisted horseshoe roll is great. The second launch is amazing. And then my only issue, if I would even call it that, is that the trims right after the launch are a bit annoying. But honestly, the second half might be a bit even uncomfortable if those weren't there. So it's fine. Pretty much every element on this ride is super snappy and intense. And really everything about it is great. And also, I forgot to mention, the ejector hill on this ride is crazy. It's almost as good as the stuff we'll be seeing on a coaster that is quite near Maverick. My number 5 pick is my favorite B&M of all time, Nemesis at Olin Towers. It's kind of sad I wasn't able to get a re-ride and that the ride broke down, but the one ride I got on it was still amazing. This is a terrain coaster, and I really like terrain coasters, especially one part where there's a creek flowing downstream and you're going the opposite direction of the creek. That's pretty disorienting. And since this can't go above the tree line, you get to the top of the hill and you're still on the ground. And there's only a tiny dip before an entire inversion, and you just think, how are we ever going to make it over this? Then somehow just the train gets a ton of speed out of nowhere and starts flying through the rest of the course. This ride's pacing is on point. The G-forces on this are amazing. I grayed out at least once, if not a few more times on this ride. The theming is decent, and I just love everything about this ride. I'm also curious to see how this future retrack will affect how good the ride is. Number 4 is Twisted Timbers at King's Dominion. This was the second RMC hybrid I've ever been on, years after Wicked Cyclone. And I was, again, blown away by this ride, except that was significantly more recently. I've had, I believe, between Christmas and the time I originally went, 4 or 5, maybe even 6 rides on this thing. They've all been amazing. Back rows, obviously the highlight. The first drop in the back row is really great. The 3 camelbacks right after the first turnaround are obviously the highlights of the ride. And this probably would be higher if the second half didn't just feel like it was just a bunch of random elements strewn together. I mean, it's good, don't get me wrong, I mean, it's an RMC hybrid, but the second half feels a bit randomly chosen. but it's still great. Number 3 is a ride I had been a bit harsh on in the past, and then I kind of mentioned that I liked it more, but I didn't give it enough credit. El Toro is one of, if not the best wooden coaster ever made. In the back row, the first drop is the best first drop at any coaster. The 2 camelbacks are insane. The Rolling Thunder Hill is crazy. And I really don't think people give enough credit to the second half of this ride. It's not as great as the first half, but still, everything after the Rolling Thunder Hill kind of almost feels like it's an Intamin Blitz layout. Obviously, like, no inversions or anything. But the very snappy, whippy turns, that does not feel like something that belongs on a wooden coaster, but it works so well. I'm sorry for calling you overrated, El Toro. You are great. Number 2 is Intimidator 305 at King's Dominion. I rode this ride, I believe, 6 times when I went to King's Dominion for 1.5 days. That's how good it was. It was by far my favorite. And it just is so my kind of ride. It's super intense, obviously. That first turn, it's a grout every time. Low to the ground, snappy transition, some decent air time, and it's great. The first drop isn't as good as some of the other Gigas due to the restraints, but obviously you need those restraints because blacking out isn't that uncommon on this ride. I didn't, but I wasn't too far off. Yeah, this ride is absolutely insane. My only real issue with it is the trims on the airtime hill, but there's like one turn after that airtime hill, so it's not really that big of a deal. But pretty much take the good snappy turns from Maverick, except you go through them at like 90 miles an hour, and after a 300-foot drop. This thing was a complete failure, like financially, and it's not popular at all. But man, is it a good ride. Honestly, number 1 should be obvious. I said it in a vlog a few weeks ago that this was undoubtedly my number 1. Of course, I'm talking about Moose on the Loose at Darien. I've just received word that Moose on the Loose does not count as a coaster. That's a bit embarrassing. Okay, I think I found a replacement number 1. I also mentioned that this was my number 1 in a vlog a few weeks ago, and that is Steel Vengeance at Cedar Point. Unsurprisingly, this is my favorite coaster I've ever been on. I've been on it 3 times, 2 times more near the back, and 1 time in 40-degree weather, I was in the front row. But every single part of this ride is just amazing. The first few hills before the lift hill give a shocking amount of airtime. The first drop is great, the speed hill is great, but then the Top Hat and Outer Bank Hill are the 2 best airtime moments on any coaster ever. Maybe even the 2 best moments on any coaster ever. Yeah, that Top Hat Hill is some crazy sustained ejector, and the Outer Bank is some crazy sideways sustained ejector. Then you have some decent inversions, some more great airtime, and then the mid-course. I personally think the first half is much stronger than the second half. I like the second half enough. I like the smaller bunny hills. I like the 2-0 rolls are pretty solid. And the pacing is just exceptional. But the second half of the ride is very solid. Don't get me wrong. It's just I'm definitely somebody who likes the first half a lot more. The theming is not too bad, but honestly, when it comes to a ride like this, theming doesn't even matter. I don't know if there's even a better coaster in existence right now. There's only like a handful I can even think of that could be better. Maybe Hukuge, Velocicoaster, and DC Rivals, and that's about it. And just this thing is amazing, and is probably going to stay my number 1 for a long time. Unless Moose on the Loose gets counted as a coaster. Thank you an extra amount for watching this video. Despite the amount of effort I put into this video, I don't expect it to get this many views, but we'll see. So thank you so much for watching, even if you just skip to the top 10, I don't care. Thank you for supporting this channel. Thank you to my exceptional editor who really made this all possible, thanks to their amazing contributions. Like, as you can see by this picture, amazing contributions. So thank you for watching, thank you for 100 subscribers, and let's get to 1,000. Nah, never mind, that's not gonna happen.